Antwi, Akom, like our first two speakers this morning, has dedicated his life to promoting the concept of sustainability throughout our inner cities and schools. A leading expert on the green economy, climate change, and educational equity, Antwi has worked to create partnerships between local residents, schools and universities, environmental and educational experts, community-based organizations, labor unions, green businesses, and city planners so that they can find ways to improve the health of their communities and help vulnerable people out of poverty. In 2009, Antwi co-founded the Environmental Sustainability Planning Network that drafts local and regional climate action plans to reduce carbon emissions, secure land tenure, improve economic opportunities, build infrastructure, and improve environmental health. Now, earlier this year, Antwi founded the Wangari Maathai Center for Economic, Educational, and Environmental Design to encourage leading academics and community leaders and decision makers to address issues like energy, education, advanced manufacturing, and design. The organization's most recent project is Greening the Educational Industrial Complex, which is pioneering curricula that combine art and social media with science, technology, engineering, and math to create college and career pathways in environmental and clean energy fields for low-income and vulnerable youth. Antwi earned a BA from the University of California, Berkeley, an MA from Stanford University, as well as a PhD in sociology from the University of Pennsylvania. He is currently an associate professor of environmental sociology, urban education, and African American Studies at San Francisco State University, and has been a research fellow at UC Berkeley's Institute for the Study of Social Change, as well as at University of San Francisco's Institute for Health Policy Studies. Please welcome to the stage Antwi Akom.
Great to see everyone. So, I'm a professor, so I'm going to profess a little bit here with you today. And the PowerPoint's going to be up there to sort of guide you and have you keep pace with me. So I want to start off by talking about what I see as the problem of the 21st century. The problem of the 21st century is the problem of climate justice. In particular, the ways in which the climate justice movement respond to growing issues of racial, gender, and socioeconomic inequality. Long before Hurricane Katrina, communities of color from West Harlem to East Los Angeles, from the Cancer Alley that runs from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, all the way to New Orleans, or from the Toxic Triangle, where I do my own work, which runs from Richmond, California, all the way down through Berkeley, into Oakland, across the bridge to Bayview Hunters Point, San Francisco. Long before Hurricane Katrina, low-income communities and communities of color, we knew that there was a health-wealth gap. We knew that there were eco-haves and eco-have-nots. We knew that race and class played a role in terms of who gets left behind with respect to housing, healthcare, education, and so on. But what Hurricane Katrina did, and more recently, the BP oil spill or the Haitian earthquake, is that it blew the lid off of environmental racism and the color-coded ways in which our governments respond to some of our nation's most vulnerable populations. And I start here because even though the problem of the 21st century is the problem of climate crisis and climate destabilization, there is a second climate crisis growing alongside the first with equally devastating effects and similar social origins. It is a crisis of our human resources. It is a crisis of our human imagination. It is a crisis of our human innovation. It is the crisis of our educational systems, not system, but systems. So we have two climate crises happening at the same time, both with devastating consequences for the future of the planet. We have the collapse of our ecological systems, and we have the collapse of our educational systems. And yet, there are not enough people talking or thinking about the relationship between the two. There are not enough people talking or thinking about how does the environment impact our schools and our school children. We've got lead in the paint. We've got arsenic in the water. We've got PCBs in the windows. We've got asbestos in the ceilings and the floors. We are at a place where the building stock in urban and rural communities is so dilapidated, so dysfunctional, that we are creating what I call toxic toddlers. We are at a place where the very food and the school lunches that we are feeding our children are filled with high fat, high salt, high sugar, creating what Kozol would call death at an early age. I call it Eco-Apartheid, because it's not just happening in our schools, it's happening in our communities, and there is a racial, gendered, and socioeconomic dimension to all of this. Now, Van Jones was the first one who coined the term eco-apartheid. And for Van, eco-apartheid referred to a situation where the benefits of the green economy bypass communities of color. Now, even though that's a powerful definition, for me, it wasn't a strong enough definition, because for Van, eco-apartheid was something that would happen in the future. Whereas for me, eco-apartheid is something that's happening right now to all of us. And eco-apartheid is much... I feel you, brothers. And to me, eco-apartheid is much greater than the green economy. So I've taken the initial concept of eco-apartheid and turned it into a systems theory that examines the ecological impacts of structural racialization. That is, I highlight the ways in which structures, institutions, and cumulative causation produce unequal environmental health outcomes and other benefits and burdens based on race, class, gender, language, immigration status, as well as their interconnections. In an eco-apartheid analysis, outcomes matter more than intent. So, why is this important? Who cares? Well, the significance of redefining eco-apartheid is threefold. First, eco-apartheid suggests that environmental bads like toxic waste are in communities of color, while environmental goods such as Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, open space, parks are in wealthier neighborhoods. Second, eco-apartheid is a more powerful definition than environmental racism, because it goes beyond race to capture inequalities such as space, place, and waste, like the urban grocery gap, the transportation gap, the fresh produce gap, while simultaneously centering racism, and their political implications. Third, eco-apartheid captures the political, historical, and spatial dimensions to racial and gender inequality. That is, and this is in the words of Tim Wise, the history of America is the history of systematic, institutionalized racial privilege for white people and white-looking people, right? And that's really critical, because this is not to blame white folks or anyone else. This is to say, rather, we need to understand the role that whiteness has played in US history, even if you are not white, right? We need to understand that people of color have loved our own racial and ethnic identities. But many times, we have had to pass, that is, categorize ourselves as white in order to access scarce institutional resources and privileges. That is part of our history that we have to understand if we're going to interrupt these processes and break these cycles. So the history of America is the history of systematic institutionalized racial privilege for white people and white-looking people. Whether we are talking about the Naturalization Act of 1790, the first law passed by Congress after the Constitution was ratified, which says whites and whites only could be free citizens of the United States. Or whether we're talking about the Homestead Act of 1862, which guaranteed whites 160 acres of land for $10, and black people and other folks of color, we couldn't even get 40 acres and a mule. Or whether we're talking about federally subsidized, federally underwritten, federally guaranteed FHA and VHA loans. On the backs of those loans was the creation of the white middle class, and if we would have done the same thing for black folks or other people of color, we would have called it welfare, but when we did it for white folks, we called it good, sound economic policy. And as a result of these systematic institutionalized racial privileges, the average white family has 14 times the net worth as the average black family, 11 times the average net worth as the average Latino family, right? Not because of hard work, not solely because of hard work, right? Not solely because they're more qualified, not solely because of better values, not solely because of better morals, but because of intergenerational, systematic, institutionalized, in part, racial privilege. Now, we largely know about this in terms of wealth, but there's a whole new body of research, and I'm amongst those researchers, who are looking at this in terms of how is this impacting our health, right? How is this impacting the life expectancy gap? How is this impacting creating healthy schools and sick schools, winner regions and loser regions? So we have not correctly identified the problem. We do not have an achievement gap. We have an opportunity gap. An achievement gap implies that the inequalities are based on cultural or genetic differences. An opportunity gap remaps existing inequities onto structural conditions. So if we see it as an opportunity gap, then we have to ask ourselves, what happens to those young people who don't make it into school? Now, as many of you know, the United States is 5% of the world's population, but we house 25% of the world's prisoners, right? 1 out of every 4 people locked up anywhere in the world, and this is coming from Van Jones, is locked up in a United States jail or prison. And most of those folks are poor, black, and Latino. So in California, this particular graph shows that the number of 18 to 24-year-olds in the California Department of Corrections, which is the first bar, is 6,886. The number of black males in the UC system is 1,606. And the California State University system is 4,187. That means that there are more black males in the California Department of Corrections than there are in the UC or CSU system combined. This is a crisis. This is a crisis in terms of human cost, a total waste of talent and genius, because there is talent and genius in our nation's jails and prisons. And there's also a monetary cost, right? 450,000 students drop out of high school every year at a cost of $46 billion over the course of their lifetime, right? What we need to be doing is building college and career pathways out of poverty for these students who are stuck in jail, getting them on the right track and getting them jobs in the clean energy economy. That's what we need to be doing. So what can be done? What can we do about this? It all starts with education, right? Education is that magic bullet that can save us and transform us from a life of poverty, a life on the margins, to the epicenter, and a life of sustainability, you would think. But how many of you have ever seen a school of education? Don't they look like on a college campus? The Superfund site? The one building that is surrounded by brownfields, right? The one building on the college campus that was the last to be retrofitted, the last to be remodeled after the School of Business, after the School of Engineering, after the College of Science, right? Those places are looking like cathedrals of higher education, right? Whereas the schools of education look like toxic wastelands. And K through 12 is no different. When you look at a K through 12 school, many of them look like dungeons. And you all know exactly what I'm talking about. Many of them look like prisons, right? That's saying a whole lot about how we value education. We're all witnesses to this. We're all a part of it. How can everyday people like ourselves, philanthropists, as many of you are in this room, funders, thought leaders, how can we all not see the obvious connection that if schools of education die, then guess what's next? Business, engineering, literature, the arts. Oh, I forgot. The arts are already dead. And engineering and science and math are not far behind. They're dying. Just look at the math and science scores of our nation's school children. So in light of all this, what can be done? What does it mean to green the educational industrial complex? First, we have to have a change in critical consciousness, how we think about our relationships to the world. Instead of teaching our children that nature is some sort of unlimited credit card, we need to teach our children, we need to return to the ways of being in harmony with the earth, right? We need to teach our children that we are our earth's custodians. Instead of having fast food schools, we need to have a slow food movement that brings organic produce locally grown to schools, which will cut, that's something to cheer about. So what are we doing in California to achieve this goal? This is 3 cool things that we're doing with youth to reduce climate change. 1, we are working with young people to get rid of toxic Superfund sites in our neighborhoods. There was a time very recently where we took a young lady and a group of students to another neighborhood, a wealthier neighborhood in San Francisco. And one of my students said to me, you know, I wish this city loved my neighborhood the way that it loves this neighborhood, right? I wish this city loved my neighborhood the way that it loves this neighborhood. And that was really powerful, right? And so in order to remind the student of how much we loved her neighborhood, in order to remind the student that everyday residents have the power to take action and change their own lives, we partnered with a diverse group of organizations, faith-based organizations, Muslims and Christians, right, working together, because the goal is that we all bring each other together. Activists and young people, youth and adults, to draft legislation to get rid of toxic Superfund sites in our neighborhood. In 10 days, in the year 2008, we collected 11,000 signatures to get this on the ballot. Unfortunately, we lost. Measure G, endorsing this corporation's $1.2 billion development, won by 61% of the vote. But all was not lost. Because the approach we take is that if you are outnumbered, if you feel like you could be defeated, number one, you won't be defeated, but that you can use social media as a tool when you lack the numbers in terms of people to transform the social and material conditions that are impacting you. So we combine a transformation of self and mindfulness education with learning science, taking young people into the community to actually collect particulate matter around diesel fuel emissions. Then we use digital media and filmmaking to make massive narratives for wide distributions. The film I'm about to show you gives you one example of the powerful work that young people have done to change their conditions. It was a film made by one of our partners, Conscious Youth Media, and their director, Deborah Koffler. Video.
If you take a ride yourself, that's what you need to do, is ride around up there on West Point Road and see how many of those houses are boarded up. And when you're talking about people that are homeless, families that are in the streets, it is a crime and a disgrace that the city is allowing this to happen, especially in the poor communities. Now you can answer all the questions you want, but the plan is hoping all of you black folk get out of San Francisco.
It's bigger than just moving from house to house. Don't you see what's going on? All the construction, the new condos they building out here? Why you think they're trying to evict everyone?
Name and address, please.
D'Angelo King, 92 West Point Road, Hunter's View.
That's why we're making this documentary. We're trying to share what the community had to say. Marcus wanted to get their take on what's going on at HP today.
I am tired of speaking over graves as opposed to graduations, of seeing t-shirts with our loved ones with RIP next to them.
And ain't nobody coming to the streets. All we know is the streets. We on the streets all day.
Now is the time to educate ourselves before it is too late.
You're sitting on top of your crazy, toxic, super fun site, and you don't even know it.
For your own safety, you are required to wear this face mask at all times.
What we gonna be doing today?
Moving dirt.
Moving dirt.
Dirt. While they get ready to clean the dirt or parcel A and build new condos, we're being forced out by evictions and gang injunctions.
For us, this is our last stomping grounds, and we ain't about to leave. In fact, this is up to you. You all need to do something and stand up for our rights.
And use this.
Can we give the kids a hand? So, one of the things we teach our young people is about mindfulness, bringing a critical awareness to our experiences through understanding their own history, the history of others, and conscious breathing and reflection based on purpose and hope. And through the power of mindfulness, what we have found is that they get if they get a negative stimulus, there's a completely different reaction for all of us, right? And what we believe is that we call it the 4 C's. Through mindfulness, if you change your consciousness, then you can change your conditions. If you change your conditions, then you can change the cultures in the schools. If you change the culture in the school, then you can change the social and material conditions that are oppressing you in your community. Once we teach our students mindfulness, we then move on to having young people develop policy. The second cool thing we're doing with young people, and we'd love for all of you to get involved, is developing an international climate justice youth bill of rights. That's something to get excited about. We want the youth bill of rights to complement the Copenhagen Manifesto and meet greenhouse gas reductions equivalent to those outlined in the Kyoto Protocol and applied to the post-2012 period. So we would love to build with any and all of you around this important work. The third cool thing we're doing with youth is we are retrofitting every school building in urban and rural communities and making them energy efficient by 2020. We've already received funding from the Department of Energy and the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Phase 1 starts with appliances, and Phase 2 starts with buildings and schools. We're calling it the Emerald Schools Partnership. It's another project of real doing, real action that all of you can get involved and support. We've already received major funding from the Packard Foundation, Nathan Cummings Foundation, the Mott Foundation, Robert Woods Johnson Foundation, $1.5 million from the Department of Energy. Our vision, why can't we have schools with living walls, vertical walls of plants that filter air to help reduce the carbon footprint? Why can't we have schools, every school that has solar panels on top of the schools that help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and young people actually get paid for putting up the solar panel? Why can't we have greenhouses, edible gardens, permaculture, so that students get to grow organic, locally grown food and have that available in their schools instead of the garbage, high-fat, high-in-saturated lunch that they're currently fed that's causing death at an early age? Why can't we have college and career pathways that have a core academic component, a core career technical education component, core work-based learning experiences, and wraparound support services like dental clinics in schools, health clinics in schools, right? Why can't schools become centers of communities, right, instead of marginalized and looking like prisons or dungeons? When we do these things, when we are mindful, when we measure these human measures, and this comes from some of the great work of Jeff Duncan Andrade, who wrote an important book called The Art of Critical Pedagogy with Ernest Morel. When we see increases in critical awareness, purpose, and hope, what we have found is test scores go up, writing goes up, right? Grades go up, everything goes up, and stress goes down, violence goes down, right? And the dropout rate goes down. These are pictures of our youth, some pictures of our youth. Sorry, that one's too dark, and that one's even darker. We've taken them to present in front of the Black and Hispanic Congressional Congress around our first Youth Bill of Rights. This is our second one that's focusing on climate justice. Poor youth and youth of color have been locked out of the pollution-based economy. The goal of the Emerald Schools Project is to inspire and train a new generation of climate activists, of climate champions, of energy innovators. What we are creating is visionary, technologically innovative, community-committed climate activists. What we need are green jobs, not jails, green education, not orange incarceration. Thank you very much.